Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Antoine Mottier, Technical Evangelist at Bonitasoft, and today I will explain how you can easily deploy Bonita in the cloud and how it can help you to test your application and in which way we can automate the build, the deployment and test of Bonita application. So this is what we refer our Bonita continuous delivery module that Bonitasoft offer since last December. But first, I'd like to start with a little bit of overview of the Bonita solution, just to allow everyone to have in mind clearly what are the different components of the solution and how they work together. Also, just a quick reminder, during this presentation, if you have any question, please use GoToWebinar tool to send them, and I will take time at the end of the presentation to answer all the questions you might have. So first, let's start with a little overview of the Bonita solution. So there is actually two parts in the Bonita solution. One side is the developer environment, where you will create your application. So that include, for example, the process modeling. You know, as Bonita is a process-based platform, it makes sense to create first the process. You also are able to do in Bonita Studio to create your business data model, and you will have tooling also to create your web user interface with this nice tool based on the web standard that allows you to create web interface using drag and drop. You have all the web components that you can read there. So this is the part where actually the developer will use our development environment, so what we call Bonita Studio, to quickly create application, business application. But the next step actually would be to put this application to test or also to deploy them ultimately on a production server for the end user to use. And the end user, what they will actually get is this nice web interface where they can interact with the application. So they can perform the different tasks in the process, and this will let the process move forward and continue with execution. So that's what is illustrated here on the right-hand side, is this web interface that the user gets, and they are also available, of course, on mobile device as well. But in order to provide this to the user, you will need to set up this Bonita server to make the application available. And this comes with quite a few challenges, and I will try to give an overview of what are the challenges we will face when we want to set up a Bonita server and how we can overcome them by using cloud services, but also this Bonita continuous delivery module that we provide. First of all, I'd like to start with a little overview about the server setup. What are the main steps and what can go wrong when we do that? So first off, you need to find find the hardware, basically, do the provisioning, and make sure you have all the resources. This can be a challenge, not so much for the production server because you usually plan that, but when you start building your application, you will quickly find the need for a test server so that every developer can push the application, can push every different part of the application for testing, integration testing. And here you might not have the hardware resources at that time. So it can be really helpful to have some tooling that accelerates the provisioning. Also, the next step once you have the hardware is actually to do the operating system setup. So that's usually quite straightforward, but still it's one step. You need to remember all the proper setting of your operating system, and you will need to also do all the tuning on the configuration file each time you set up a new server. On top of that, for Bonita, you will need two main pieces of software. On one side, you have the database management system. You know that we support several database systems like MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, and so on. So you need to have that set up and also properly configured to work with Bonita. Configuration is not really specific to Bonita, it's more related to transaction, but still you need to have the proper settings there. Also, as Bonita is a Java application, you will need a Java virtual machine installed. And Bonita is a Java enterprise application, a web application, so you need an application server. So we already made that a little bit easier because we provide what we call deploy bundles that package together, like, for example, Tomcat and Bonita or Wildfly and Bonita. But so it's an extra step of the deployment. And finally, you need to make sure that all those different pieces of software are properly configured to work with each other. Like Bonita have the proper configuration to connect to the database, to store the information. So this is a set of steps that are fairly easy, but still, if you have to do this several times, like to set up different environments, you cannot really guarantee that you will have exactly the same configuration in each of your environment if you do that manually. There is still a little bit of risk that you have some difference between your test environment and your production environment. Another challenge also when you set up your Bonita platform is that usually you start with maybe a first application. It's maybe not that critical, or maybe it's just a first evaluation, a first proof of concept, and rapidly you have the need of resources for Bonita processing and Bonita application execution grows quickly. And for that, one solution is to set up a Bonita server cluster. So we will have several nodes that can answer the request of the users. You also probably want to do the same, or at least scale the database capability, because as the Bonita engine require quite powerful capability on the database side, because it uses the database to store all the information. And finally, if you go for this kind of setup for high availability or high performance, you probably want to have a load balancing in front of that. It's actually mandatory to distribute the load among the different nodes of your cluster. So again, here it's easy to do one setup of one server. If you want to create the 4 different servers of your cluster exactly the same, and make sure that the load balancer is properly configured to communicate with all those servers, there is still some risk of errors if you do this manually. And finally, the next step, it's not immediate, but at a point you will need to face the server maintenance. And this is 2 different things that you should actually consider. Is the backup of the installation itself. So actually, in which order you install the different components, like the JVM first, then the application servers and Bonita, then the database, configure Bonita to communicate with the database. So that's installation of software, but also the configuration of the software. So that's the first thing to back up if you want to be able to restore servers that crash. And the other part is also to back up your data. So back up the database used by Bonita, and we'll use database to store the Bonita configuration, but also all the data related to process execution, so related to the execution of the different application you deployed, and also all the business data related to the application. So that's what you need to consider when you want to do some backups. So here we have a panel of all the different challenges we may face when we want to have a Bonita server. And what actually we come up with to help you with that is what we call this Bonita continuous delivery module. And here you have a quick diagram of the architecture. So what about continuous delivery that is important is we build this module first having in mind AWS, so Amazon Web Service, to make the deployment easier. So we rely quite heavily on AWS, but it's important to remember that this tool is also able to do all the deployments for your computer and your resources on-premise. It's targeting both cloud environment but also on-premise if you prefer that option. So basically what you will have is you will have this controller here on the DevOps computer. This controller is actually a Docker image will run on the DevOps computer, and it will be used to create the EC2 instance on Amazon and install Docker, deploy the Bonita Docker image, make sure that also we have created the database schema on RDS if we use the database as a service from Amazon, or maybe deploy another Docker container with, like, for example, a Postgres database image if we prefer to have full control on our Postgres installation. And we'll also deal with the complexity of setting up the cluster environments, so creating multiple nodes. I will just create them exactly the same and take care of the configuration of the proxy, of the load balancing. So it really automates a lot of steps in order to have a fully functional Bonita platform. It will also deal with a license request, for example, for your Bonita server. So what I will do right now is I will just do a little demonstration about how the tool actually worked. So I have here my my Docker image running on my computer, and what I want to show you first is the configuration file for this deployment, because obviously there is a few settings to define when you want to create your Bonita server. But what is really helpful is that everything is in one single file here. So first part is mostly AWS settings, so which SSH key to use to connect to the server will create, some security settings, information about the network, in which region you want to deploy, and what kind of image you will use to set up the server, so which kind of finally operating system you'll use. And also probably the most important one are the size of the instance that will be used. So this lets you adjust the type of server you will create based on the load you will have. So for example, for a test server, you will probably have maybe smaller instance if it's just a short test, integration test. But if you want to do a load testing before putting the application on production, you might want to go with a bigger instance type. Next part of the configuration file is basically the Bonita related settings. So which version, which edition, which kind of database you want to use, the username and password for the default administrator. And you have also the clustering settings here. So in this example, we don't set up a cluster, but we'll just use one node for our server. Next step is licensing settings, so related to your Bonita subscription. So this is a feature that is only available with for Bonita subscription users. So it will actually request the license automatically and add it to your server. And finally, you can have some email notification. And actually that's it. The configuration is pretty straightforward. Not a lot of settings to define here. And now what I will do is I will actually use our tools. So it's a basic command line. So I'll just have this Y option here to assume yes to all the questions the script might have. And I will specify the scenario to use. So I have one here for my demo with all my credentials. It's why I didn't show this one in the presentation here, but it's exactly the same kind of file I just show you. And I will ask to create the instance to deploy Bonita and also to deploy Bonita, so to command create and deploy. And I will run that. And what it will start immediately is to create the EC2 instance, and then it will start to install Docker on it, deploy the Bonita Docker image, and do all the steps automatically. So you can see already like is installing Docker, uploading the image, and we'll go back quickly on that to check the status of our server setup. In the meantime, I will continue about doing some highlights of the various components we are using and the benefit we get from using these components. So EC2 from Amazon Web Service, it helps us a lot on the provisioning part. And if you have, for example, the need of doing some tests of your application, it's not usually necessarily it's not mandatory, sorry, to have a Bonita server available at all time. You just need them for the time of your test, for the time frame of your test, and then you can shut it off. So here you will be able to use EC2 just for the time of your test, then stop the instance, and you actually being charged only for the time you use the server. So it's allow you to optimize the cost related to the server by using EC2. Also, EC2 provide us with operating system image pre-configured, so it's help us to in the installation phase, like it's one step less to perform. Also related to provisioning, when you want to set up a cluster, usually it's a lot of hardware to buy, a lot of questions where to put them in different zones, in different area. Here it's all handled by Amazon for us, so that's a great addition to our setup. The next component we are using here is it's a database as a service. This is called RDS from Amazon, and obviously it save us some time on the setup. Like it's just a few clicks and you have a fully operational database system. They will also handle security and bug fix for us. Like they will do all the needed updates, and as the security become more and more a concern nowadays, it's really helpful to have someone to rely on to make sure that our infrastructure is always up to date with the latest security fix. A great part also handled by RDS is the backup. As I said, a lot of, it's all actually data handled by Bonita for application execution are stored in database. So we have two different kind of databases that are used by Bonita to store the information. If the database are on RDS, the backup is handled by RDS and you have security for your data. Also, where RDS really comes handy is when you want to scale. So if you need more storage, or if you need more computing resource, it's really easy to adjust with RDS. Finally, the last component we are using to help us in the deployment of Bonita is Bonita Docker image. So we have this image that isolates us from the operating system, so that limit really that reduces to a minimum the risk of software conflict, version conflict, and all that. We really have a full control of, on the environment where Bonita will be executed. And in this Docker image we bundle, of course, the JVM and the application server. So we bundle it with a Tomcat and the Oracle JVM, all pre-configured and ready to be used. And finally, also this Docker image has a really simple configuration compared to all the options you might have if you do a full custom setup. Here, the Docker image exposed only the most useful settings. Still, all that approach and generally about the Bonita continuous delivery module, you still have the full option to customize the setup. It's really something that we at Bonitasoft are really careful about, is always leave the door open to any customization you might want to do. This is just that by default, you have configuration files that are easier with less settings to make the deployment faster and easier to maintain. So this is globally the solution. Like we have EC2 for the infrastructure and the operating system, RDS for the database, and our Docker image of Bonita with the Java virtual machine, the application server, and Bonita web application. We'll just go back now to my execution here, and you can see that it's now done. And here we have actually the URL that we can use to connect to our newly created Bonita instance. So I'll just open up my web browser here, put the URL, and try to connect. So it's good, it's answering. If I'm logging in here, I can successfully log in. I get this technical user warning because right now I'm just an administrator of the platform. We don't have any user. It's a brand new platform, but if I want, I can quickly create a test user and should save him here. Yep. So I have the user stored on my new Bonita platform. I can log out here. I forgot. I need to quickly add this user to a profile, so you can log in. Let me quickly do that. I'm sorry. Here, and I will add my user. And now if I log out, I can log in with my new user on my Bonita platform. And okay, so it's probably just, I don't remember actually the password I typed, but user is there and you should be able to log in. So if I just scroll back a little bit to highlight the important steps here that we have performed. So the script create for the EC2 instance. It install on the instance the Docker engine. It deploy on the instance the Bonita Docker image. So here we are running with the version 7.6.1, the latest version of Bonita. And then I will actually request the license for Bonita. And when this is all set, it will start the Docker container. And when Bonita starts, it will actually create the table in the database. So everything is up and running at the end of the start of Bonita. And the script check for us that the Bonita server is live, and once it's live, it just reports the URL here. To automate all the steps, to give a little bit of information about the technical tools we are using here, actually to automate this deployment, we are using the Ansible, so it will be in charge of all the steps I listed here. So the provisioning, creation of the database schema, installation of Docker, deployment of Bonita, and configuration, installation and configuration of the load balancing if you are in a cluster environment. What is great about using this tool, Ansible, is that it's also let us do some on-premise deployment. Like if you already have your server, you will create sorry, it's the word, but a list of all the server you want to use to deploy Bonita, and Ansible will be able to get that list and do the deployment for you. Like doing the installation, it will connect on the various server to perform the installation. Right now, I'll speak about, right now we support AWS and this on-premise deployment, but potentially in the future version, we'll also provide support for other cloud providers, such as Microsoft Azure, because basically the tool we are using provide all the library to connect to other cloud provider. So we'll probably be able to bring support for other cloud environments. So in this presentation, so far I focused on the provisioning part of Bonita continuous delivery module. So it's basically the part that we are aiming at sysadmin. But there is a second part that will come in future version. This is for continuous integration, so more target at developers that want to test their Bonita application. Because right now with the module, we have a really easy way to create a new Bonita server, and that can be really useful if you plug that with building, deploying, and testing automation, so with continuous integration. So you can allocate a test server, build, deploy on this test server, and run your tests. And when your tests are finished, you just stop the server and remove the server instance. So that's the second part of this Bonita continuous delivery module. And this part should come in June this year. But just to show you an highlight of how it works, here is globally how it works with Bonita. So when you are in your development environment, so that is Bonita Studio, you have a workspace that you can connect actually to a versioning control system. So it can be, for example, Subversion or Git. And then the continuous integration software that we use, like here it's Jenkins, will orchestrate the builds, the deployment, and the test execution for your application. So we'll get all the information like the process definition, the business data model, all the web user interface that you create in Bonita Studio. You will get them from the version control system. It will build them, so package them as Bonita artifact, and deploys them in your test environment. So this test environment in the version we'll release in June will be created by the BCD module. So will be created, for example, as we did today on AWS. And after the deployment, it can automate the process execution to do some tests, like if we reach the expected step, that the data are been correctly updated, a whole bunch of tests like that. And if all the tests are green, are correct, are successful, it will actually archive the artifact, and they will be ready for deployment. We don't aiming at automating the deployment yet. Right now, we feel like it's a good first step to just keep the artifact and let the administrator choose to deploy them, for example, for user acceptance test or in production environment when they feel they are ready. I just want to come back on this. If you're already a Bonita customer, there is already some technical preview of this continuous integration framework. So if you're interested, you can check out on the knowledge base on the customer portal. There are already some resources available to do some test automation. So just a quick sum up about what we have seen. So the solution, the value brings by BCD solution is really to focus on the automation of all these repetitive and error-prone tasks. Because as said in the introduction, like installing an operating system or installing the JVM, configuring the application server, they are not really complex, but when you have all these tasks all together and you need to do it multiple times for multiple servers of your application server, being able to automate them really reduces the risk of doing any mistakes in the configuration. Also, it's really speed up the deployment because basically it's automatic, so you don't have any interaction. As you've seen, I just need to edit this configuration file, run the tool, and at the end I have a platform ready to be used. It's helped us to absorb the load, the growing need of resources for a Bonita server. Like if you need to add a node to a cluster environment, you just edit the configuration file, run again the script, and it will add a new node to your cluster. And of course, as all the solution we built with Bonita, we try to use as much as possible standard or what are called de facto standards, like nowadays everyone using Docker. Ansible is also quite popular to automate deployment, and it's popular tool among DevOps. So we try to make this as easy as possible for customization if needed. One last word before I answer the question is now Bonita is an official AWS technology partner. That means that we can work closely with AWS to make sure our applications are fully compatible with AWS service, so we can guarantee that Bonita will run smoothly on AWS. It's a great news for us to be able to guarantee this level of compatibility with AWS. So now if you have any question, please send them in the chat in GoToWebinar and I'll be ready to answer. Sorry. Okay, so just to clarify about Microsoft Azure, right now we don't officially support Azure, but if you have the need of such kind of support, feel free to get in touch with us because it's not our first cloud environment we focus on, because people ask a lot more about AWS, but this is something that should be doable as we are using this Ansible component that come with a set of plugins, modules for Azure. So if you have the needs to deploy in such environment, it's possible. Also, if you are curious about the deployment on-premise, you can actually check out the Bonita documentation, and there is already available there the documentation for this new module, and there is some nice resources. So if you go to documentation bonitasoft.com. Under add-on, you can find the BCD module with all the explanation about the architecture, the various, the configuration file, the various options that you can add to the configuration file to tune your installation. Also, if you have any other question that you might think about later on after the end of this webinar, you have in the chat the link to the contact us form, so you can just use this web form to reach out to us and ask any question you might have related to Bonita platform. Okay, so as we have no further question, I think I will end the session here. Thanks for joining us. I hope you appreciate this presentation about BCD. And if you have any question, yeah, feel free to reach out to us with the contact us form, and we'll get back to you with any information you might provide. Thanks. Have a nice day. Bye.